Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about the subject that's very dear to my heart. If you've been watching my videos, you would know that I do love playing my machines through external head preamps. And the reason is actually very simple. If you do everything right, then you're gonna get much better sound this way. So today we're gonna look at very top level description of how it is done. We're not going to make any very specific recommendations, but I'm going to give you some general idea. In this case, we're going to be looking at the Studer A810 machine. It is a very popular machine. Everybody loves it and everybody respects this particular machine. And yes, you can play it perfectly fine through its internal electronics. You're going to get very good sound actually. But the question remains, can you possibly get better sound? And the answer is yes, if you use external head preamp of good quality, as you can see in this video. We are going to separate this story into two parts. The first part will have with the machine itself and some modifications you have to perform in order to connect it to the external preamplifier. And in the second part, we're going to look at the architecture of one particular version of tube preamplifier. You don't have to pay attention to a particular brand and model here. I'm going to give you just some top-level view of the situation. For this, we're going to turn to this simple diagram on my blackboard. This is a typical representation of one very simple tape machine. On the left, you see the playback head feeding its signal into the amplification stage and then to the output. And that's very typical, and it's going to work in most cases. But the question is, can you make it better? And yes, but the question remains, how do you connect your external head preamp to all this situation? So if you look at this diagram, you will see that I have added another connection here. And essentially, you just go directly to the head output or this preamplifier input and connect it to some external connection or cable, which will get the signal to the external preamp. Now, I know some of you will immediately object to this configuration. They will say the input of this amplification stage will do something nasty to the signal. So they will suggest that you really should do it this way. Separate the two. Well, it is true and it is not true. The truth is the gain stage input can create some issues, but I've done it many times and I have not seen any cases when I would hear some negative effect of such connection. So generally speaking, people will say, you want to have a switch in line and you flip it between two positions, one going directly to the internal circuits, and you can play your tape recorder as you normally would do, or you can flip it in a second position and now you connect your playback head to your external preamp. And yes, this will work. It's a complication because in many cases you need a 4-pole switch, which is not very common part. Yes, it can be done. I have done it in a number of cases. Is it my favorite system? No, I don't think so. But before we do that, let's look at the actual Studer internal architecture. You can see now two amplification stages. And that's right. Number one is a small preamplifier located right next to the head. It takes very small signal from the playhead, amplifies it, and then transmits to your main amplification stage. There are a lot of good reasons for this type of architecture. But the problem is, now you cannot take your signal from here, because at this point you will be exposed to all the negative artifacts of the first preamplifier stage. In other words, if you would like to do direct connection in case of Studer, you do it this way. And I've done it that way, and it works very, very well. Actually, this is how it is connected on the machine that's playing now. Both direct output and the first preamplifier are connected in parallel. And yes, you can break this connection if you want to. There is a simple connector inside. But in reality, like I said, I don't hear any negative effects of this type of parallel connection. Some might say that you might have issue with the loading parameters, but that's very easy to take care of in some simple calculations. Now let us take a look at the head preamp. And basically what I'm suggesting, for many of you, building a head preamp from scratch can be a very, very difficult proposition. Yes, some of you are very experienced engineers and they can design their own, but for many of customers or people who can just tinker with products, it usually is better idea to start with something almost there. And in this case, the best starting position is some good phono stage. And the reason I'm saying that is that phono stage and head preamps are almost identical sisters. They basically take the signal of about the same magnitude and process it, amplify and equalize the signal and output it. But the general architecture is very similar. In order to better understand the differences and similarities between the two, let's examine the body plot of the phono stage. It is a very well-known RIAA network curve. And basically it starts at very high number, a lot of decibels there, and it keeps going down. Somewhere along the way in the middle it makes this wiggle, and then it continues straight down. There are many ways of implementing this particular network, so I'm not going to talk about any particular implementation. If you embark on that project, you need to study the schematic of this particular phono stage, identify the equalization components, and figure out the best way of dealing with them. However, if you look here, you will see that essential characteristic of this curve is its gain. The gain at about 1 kilohertz. And when you deal with small signals from phono cartridges or tape heads, you typically need gain of about 55 to 65 dB. And that should be enough for most medium to low inductance tape heads, which are very, very common. Now let's look at the differences between the two realms, the phono stage RIAA curve and IEC curve for the tape. And in this case, I'm going to be talking mostly about 15 inch per second equalization, just simply because it's probably the most common you're going to be using in this type of situation. And you can see that now we got rid of this wiggle in the middle. So the curve keeps going smoothly down until at some frequency it becomes flat shelf. Disregard for now what is happening in low frequencies. We can deal with this later, but it's not the major area of concern. So with this in mind, let us take a look at one particular case, one particular implementation of this idea. This product started as a phono stage, and you can see all the normal, usual components to it. However, you can see that on the front page, you have controls, and those controls will determine equalization curves. This particular model, I have several of them designed, and this particular model supports two speeds, 15 and 30 IPS, and only one type of equalization. Here you have a better view of those controls. You can adjust each dial for particular equalization curve, and this switch will provide the switch between 15 and 30 inches per second equalizations. It's very simple. The bottom line is the number of possibilities or number of configurations you would like to have in your head preamp really is determined by you, your skill level, and your particular needs. In many cases, I found that even single EQ preamp works very, very well in some applications. And I have one like that. I have actually two amps like that. In other cases, I just go for 15 inch per second or 30 inch per second selection. And that's usually enough for me. See, the problem is the more you're trying to cover, the more possibilities and options you're trying to cover, the more complicated your circuit design becomes. And when dealing with something like phono stage, or in this case, head preamp, you always have to be mindful of noise issues. You're dealing with small signals, and every time you introduce a switch, other components, adjustment components, you create additional paths, and therefore you're always open to some additional interference. At this point, I would like to mention another important element. If you're going to be moving your product from one machine to another, you probably want to have input loading switch, because in some cases you have to change that loading. Your tape heads may be different, therefore they may require different loading parameters. As you can see here, you have deep switches which allow you to switch different input parameters. And like I said, that's very desirable. Next is the location of your equalization circuit. In this case, it is located right here on both channels. So in some earlier models, I would just bring the wires from equalization stage to the front panel and locate the controls on the front panel. In this case, inevitably you have additional noise pickup. So generally speaking, I do not recommend this particular architecture. Instead, what you see here is extension shafts. So the controls themselves are located still in the area of high sensitivity, but the control knobs are on the front panel. Now, whether you're going with tubes or solid-state devices, this choice is entirely yours. You can have very good results with either architecture. I prefer vacuum tubes, but it's just my personal choice. A few words about input connection. lot of people maintain that balanced connection is always better. And in general, that's true, except when you're dealing with phono cartridges or tape heads. Because tape head or phono cartridge is not really a balanced source. It is what's more accurately called floating source. So it can be successfully connected either way. So I would say if you're struggling with balanced connection on your tape machine, just go with single-ended. You're probably going to get almost as good result. Sometimes you're actually going to get better results because your single-ended connection is also going to offer you lower noise. I know it's counterintuitive and counter to what you normally hear, but believe me, that's the case. A few words about the calibration. The whole point of putting controls on the front panel is to make calibration easy. And easy it is indeed. Basically, you sit in front of the machine and all you have to do is simply turn those two knobs in the front for the flattest response. It literally takes a couple minutes to calibrate one machine, and it's very, very easy and repetitive. So let me know if you have any additional questions. I would be very happy to answer them. But for now, let's put this preamp back in the system and play some very beautiful music. Before we play some music, here's the back view of this particular arrangement. As you can see, a couple more connectors have been added to the back panel of the Studer. Those cables go to the input connector on the head preamp, and out come two connectors and two cables to the rest of the system. Thank you very much for watching and hope to see you again. In the meantime, let's sit back and listen to some beautiful music. Once again, thank you for watching and hope to see you again. Please stay well.